was cold. My body couldn't provide itself with warmth. The spike of ice was quaking through the fallacy of my stomach and back. I woke up under a dark maroon sky and empty fields with nothing, miles of nothing, crawling out forever. I realized that my entire life I had been trapped in a cycle full of torment, wisping to misery, and now even with death, I was trapped. Now the voice spoke. I turned to locate the source of the sound, only to find a shadowy figure of incredible stature. A tall, faceless entity with pitch-black fog streaming from its would-be head, and what should have been feet bent over me. A ruined coal robe shrouded the figure. A tall cowl covered what face I could make out, but nothing existed underneath. Only faintly glowing violet gleams shining out from that muggy noir air stared back at me. The voice spoke like a hardened shiver, a quiet yet raspy, otherworldly voice. I saw where I was only to find shock. My eyes grew to enormous proportions, sucking in the surroundings in a frantic shrill of confusion. This place, full of dark gray rock and grossly purple skies, dark sand and crumbled ruins crippled the landscape and my spirit. Any creature in this barren land was white with death and rot. Any plant could be reduced to dust with but a fragile gesture. I shared similar vigor with the ground. The figure motioned with its long, ghastly fingers as it began down a cinder path of packed dust. I stood up and mindlessly followed well behind the speaking specter.
What did I do?
No words were spoken to keep me occupied as I followed the voiceless and sorry path. I watched my feet drag one in front of the other. For miles it seemed like we walked, and for what? I couldn't stop thinking of what happened.
It was beyond overwhelming. This was fear. I feared allowing the emotional conclusion to ruin the mood. I didn't want the specter to know anything more than what I already feared it did. A torment reduced to a dumbfounding anxiety in the face of what appeared to be a literal god. An absolute being of faint delusion, truly embodying the title of mystical deity, only existed as an emotionless monument of my feeling of suffering and disparity. Years of perseverance blasted into dust with wasted whims of patience over eons of trials. I hated the drought of necessary evil. If anything could have become anything, why not let whatever it is become whatever? I sat so long in the worry of my unconfident life leading to closed doors and broken branches, but to arrive here is only proof I was right. And in this righteousness I found fame among the lessons as they all shook their heads peering down. To daily acceptance, to yearly denial, this world of mine rolled like a crooked object to an uneven floor, barely moving at all. It wasn't time that clogged my working parts, it was the essence of time. The longer a nightmare existed, the shorter a fresh breath held. It was in no favor of mine when the lights would go out for less than 12 hours, only to be blinded for the following. Becoming a tyrant of my own undoing was such an easy role to fill. No one could hardly pass auditions for a wastemaker in my own arena of thought. It was within the illusion of ruling time that I found the good tidings to whimper for just as long as the cruel tirades to drag. A golden lollipop tastes only as sweet as the second it's lost into the sea of grass and gravel. This, however, was no opportunity for savory contrast. This draining session of parading led to a paradoxical end found nowhere within the ugly reach of its fingers. Watching plants grow eventually degrades to watching them die, and to see the moment the lively turns to deathly sometimes seems to be simultaneous. Resigning to needlessly documenting the aspect of the feeble creature too insignificant to even claim such a labeling ends in the tedious learning of futility. And with futility comes disgusting ownership of exiled time. Lead on, you gaunt lesser, and smear your rot upon your last step of perseverance. Watch your steps so as to not smudge your foot on the early furtherings of your own drowning being. All something to keep in mind when planning to destroy all you fear and strike for all that cares for. They too shall eat their way into oblivion. After what seemed like hours of speechless droning, we arrived at a frowning grand castle with less than half of its remains looking habitable. The anticipation of arriving at a destination of worth dissolved with a dark recession of hope. The The skeleton finally revealed. I began twitching and quivering, choking on my tongue. The entity turned and faced me. Never before had I felt so uneasy that I wanted to pick apart my eyes and tear into my face just to rip the vision from my mind. Staring into my soul, reviewing my life and insecurities, it saw everything. I know it did. I just didn't know how. It lifted its cowl to reveal that it indeed had no face or head at all. Its eyes were beautiful, violent purple suns on a canvas of pure black ash, harshly whisking away at the air. It existed as a shadow casted underneath cloth, and with a motion to the front of the building, I helplessly followed this skeleton, desperate now for answers. A long table with chairs meant for an entire kingdom's household sat in the middle of a gigantic empty hall. We sat down across from each other.
Speak.
It snapped. That overwhelming feeling began again. How could it expect me to know where to start? My friend had been killed. I was gone, but now I find myself inside a castle of charcoal bricks, and outside lay seas of sand and swirling deathly skies somewhere I could never imagine existed. I had no words. I stood for a minute, failing to lock eyes with the blackened ghost. I shot animal sounds and screams without the thought or the vetting of speech. These were not words, but sounds. I just yelled to a being of smoke and bones, and that felt inadequate. I knew it couldn't be real, but I stopped my protesting because it was beyond reality. The phantom began. Its words were now so dark and beautiful. I was enchanted, like a sailor to a siren song, doomed to drink its voice until being dragged down and drowned. I wanted answers, and I wanted James. I was convinced it had both.
Accept this voice.
It paused and stood up in a display I would assume would be portrayed in a terrible and crooked smile. It raised its long arms above its head.
You have finally realized.
Its words seemed so grand and empowering, yet I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. I sat and watched like a chattering child. I still couldn't force my lungs to work and allow myself to scream, so I sat.
You are all that exists, not born but built to a mortal human things that only to rise. Creation has ultimately begun only as you cast to sustain the infinite bound of the cosmos.
It spoke with exceptional exuberance. I could sense the unease of even this creature. I tried to retaliate, but my voice would only stutter and quiver. Why am I here? I cracked through tears. What happened to me? What happened to me? What happened to me? I asked. What are you? I raged, trembling. It laid back in its chair.
You have grown accustomed to your plight, and must be cleansed. What the filth from man.
It leaned closer over the table.
Leave none left unclean.
Its shadow of a body must have hosted a brain somewhere because of how effortlessly it dodged my interrogation.
You must suffer for continuation of human vitality.
It spoke again.
You are human vitality.
Too much. It was all too much. I had already endured more than I could imagine, and now I'm told to do this? Suffer? I have suffered for what was meant for millions of men to suffer. Is this my reality? Now, after all I've done, is anything real? When faced with having to completely change your face to fix a world tired of staring at it, one may grow in some form resentful. It remained unmoved by my display of panic.
You must do this. Far too much lives on your shoulders.
And with all emotion coming over me, I didn't know what I wanted to do next. Collapsing the entire castle onto us was one of the more prevailing ideas, and judging from what the smoke described, maybe I could. I could finally speak, but only as an upset infant. I screamed inaudible sentences that even I couldn't decipher. Tears bled from my eyes, and I thrashed the dust on the table in a tantrum. What did I do?
Where's James? God fucking...
I screamed every word until my throat was sore and my voice rancid. I slouched back into the chair, hanging my head and pulling off my hair. Tears poured from my face like the glue holding my head together washed away and ran out through my eyes. They pushed on, ignoring my condition.
You have power. For once in your entire life, you have power. What do you choose?
It demanded. Tears settled on my cheeks and I spoke. I just want James. It sat quiet before it violently began towards me.
It stopped a foot before me and reached out its long member, placing a hand onto my head. I had no more bereavement to exhaust it with. It was over, and as my eyes spun to nauseating speeds, I blacked out. My defeated body collapsed out of the chair, and I seized the floor like a welcoming embrace.
Time rolls its heavy wheels all as you shout.
Eons passed before my eyelids parted, finally revealing to me the yellowing white tiled ceiling. It was just becoming morning as an angry ray of sun shone through the tiny corner of a window. I sat up and saw someone crossing the view of my doorway like an illusion. Nurse. They came back startled and held up a clipboard. "Oh, yes, hi. Are you feeling all right?" they said in all professional cruelty. I need to know how I got here. I don't remember. Its smile faded as it became more rigid. Without saying anything, it looked through its clipboard in a somewhat frantic manner. It paused. "Yes, you were dropped off. You were found in it, It stopped. The nurse's eyes seemed to frown without the rest of their face. "What I heard was, we admitted you last night after, a fight, I think?" It maybe was kind enough to keep this information hidden until someone stronger than them could reward my cynicism. Who could release that they had killed someone as well as witnessed their only friend's brutal end in a dirty, filthy alley? Overwhelming was an understatement, an insult. The gilded smile of the nurse proved that they were stalling, pleading for a new visitor. It felt they could humor me with enough nonsense until someone who has handled these morbid situations more regularly arrived.
But they were lying.
I had not the brain capacity to grasp even the slightest idea of what had happened. "Well, you know how, Can I leave?" I interrupted. "I don't want to be here." I started to get up and look for my shoes and clothes. The nurse seemed so uneased and shaken. I only feel bad for her now. How could I expect them to have handled a double homicide and now want to leave seeming completely coherent and healthy? However, being neither was not for the nurse to decide. They just stood and watched in disillusion as I pulled my pants over my legs, staring. Uncomfortable feelings ripped across the room and I felt every heartbeat off their chest. You don't want to wait for your parents? I'm sure they're on their way. You should definitely wait and..." "No." I stopped them. The nurse smiled and left with an upset "okay," not wanting to spend another second in my room. I hated them, and I never even knew their name. People that try to make you feel better with a smile and sympathetic look make me hate. Acting as if you understand my situation and try to relate. It's an insulting requirement, yet a most necessary human trait.
We are all human, after all.
I dragged my feet down a sidewalk of cracks and bruises that I knew by heart, because it's the only thing you can notice when you're looking down. Dreading where the path ended, wherever you found yourself. Routine haunted every step of my being. This world was too old for its own good, and stubbornness locked all time and place. Things don't actually change. We just act like we aren't used to life to add surprise and glimmer to our existence of common mediocrity. Where was I even pulling my body's weight? Home? Pretending like I could cope with whatever veiled excuse was waiting for me to have to walk from the hospital? I continued, alone, truly alone. What was left for this world to amount to? For me, the worlds of a desperate skeleton was all I had to recite. Somewhere resides another pure being as my brother once was. If I could find one person, just one, to grind the world's hatred to mere ocean sand, hot and soothing radiance filling in every crevice of your skin and soaking up the moisture of all the earth's spite. A lonesome, burdensome person, one left alone just long enough for mediocrity to sting as it's more acquainted to. This person of similar regard and modest morality, one with perfection like that which God knows better. Just one. I looked up from the ground. Today is Tuesday, March 7th, read the electronic sign in front of my school. Tricked again by my deceitful feet to end up where I least desired. But why am I here? They must have had some intuition to lead me after all. I walked in, and I still can't remember why, but I did. I took steps through the doors and into the valley of despair. Every eye glued to me, staring at the hollow walking corpse, limping down a hall of antiquated sores and scrapes. Children parted from the presence of a god seeking its boon. I was still mindlessly trudging down this lucid lane to arrive at the drink of pure ecstasy that was to me as Aaron. It smelled the air and twisted around towards me. The missing eyeballs pulsed with festering creatures as the cold gray moons focused on my presence. Waiting in anticipation, sneering, neck cocked and eyes wider than the chasm of strength lying between us, it spoke. You live. You're actually alive. It choked with a throat full of bloated flies. I didn't stop walking, clearing my way, still miles apart. Could it really be you? Its eyes opened so wide that escaped flies bugged out into the air. I'm going to kill you. Last I knew, my good pal was found halfway around town with... Wait. It wasn't our poor good friend James. Now don't tell me it was James, the pure God of truth and forgiveness, him with sought soul, he who set to slay the filth of a world, he who has but one servant left to reburn his name of kingliness into the side of this swine of life. Was it truly him? Its words, those words. His name did not deserve such slander, and, as an abysmal apostle, I stopped and stood mere feet from the blasphemer who dared to take his name. He's dead, I finally said. Aaron's gorged body rattled and bounced while the feast of flies sprung from under its parchment skin. You're welcome. Those are your last words. And within that instant, I was over the chortle that would dare to soak its skin with a gaunt, haunting, and putrid liquid that would soon be melted into muck and strife, bleeding down onto soft flooring known only as me, you goddamn menace. The pure satisfaction, erasing fear with every 10-ton hit, leveling the face of the one who took my James, up and down, up and down. When an atheist dies and finds no God, when conspiracy is proven true and faith lost for mankind, when a king gains his power from a serpentine monarchy left only now to fix his own crooked empire, each is left both correct and remorseful. My arms become Cyprus, and Aaron the blackest soul to enter hell's gates. The flesh-burned blood exploded off of every new settling into black painted tile. Up walls, over windows, onto shoes and notebooks, pencils, hair clips, lunch boxes, everything. Ball caps, glasses, earrings, faces, mouths open, everything was blessed in the baptism of insect insides. The crying hallway erupted into mania with that dreadful fear, that all-encompassing movement disallowing any soul to quake from its bodily stance, the blessed fear of equality. I had cursed these souls to face their devil with the same gallery of giggle fucks as I have had to. The paralyzing sensation of fear. I savored every bite. I picked this one up into the air as a bloodied rag and spiked it into the ruptured rock. Every new floor crack fueled my lust for more anguish and suffering, and so again and again and again. Flooring quickly moved away from an intoxicated gain of concrete, and then again.
Exist my stretch of power. Feed and grow on your first meal since birth, and try not to choke on such rancid flesh. The fuel-igniting hands made of straw was now bright with stoked flames, and hardened fists finally formed into ashened rock.
Yes.
The absolute terror vomiting from the school shook the ground with frantic screams and wails. I finally stood back, still clasped around Aaron's neck. Its body shook and gagged. It choked on the pool of its bloodied coughs. Its eyes rolled and gushed out of their sockets and bled and bled and bled. I held until my fingers met my palm surrounding Aaron's missing, soaking sinew.
My smile hurt my ears.
The first victim of the cleanse reveals themselves. I parted the ocean of wanderers returning to the entrance. The absolute terror. A student turned to asylum with every shriek. I walked past the statues of my peers now, seeming more like monuments to my reckoning. The dismay of an entire building fell on my shoulders, and out of every screech released from that traumatized youth, I breathed in volumes of dire damnation. I ran. This time, I was the one obstructing my own feet, and I was taking myself home. I had animals to tend to, the boar and the spider. To think they would come for me returning from my recent encounter was a mockery of my tragedy. The half-hour walk from the school to my house made me heavier with every step. Every fiber of my body ached and stung with wicked and dark tendrils serrating my lower intestines. This burden I carried seemed more now like a gallon of force-fed fear stirred into my already thickened mind. I could feel every soul of humanity pulling at my chest, abusing my lungs for air. I held every life as an Olympian would to an ant. A brief and indecisive period was held for its fate, that who was in luck to be allowed the time and even to be briefly recognized as alive. I was God. Stuck in my own head and trudging past houses and buildings, I forgot to notice. Each one was created by people for people. Every bit of this earth is imprinted with effort, struggle, and humanity. I couldn't see what was in front of me. Houses zipped past as I walked. No longer I could discern the scenery from the natural blur of the sun's rays beaming onto my face. The sun felt cold on my skin. The frigid breath flew over each hair on me. If this star couldn't fulfill its purpose, then maybe I could take its place. One's entire existence was to ensure the continuation of life, and the other held the option. Take my place. Trade with me the burden of holding life in my hands while you loom overhead a million miles away, frightened by what you keep alive. I suppose in turn I possessed more ability than the yellow dwarf, which proved us different, forever trapped in its own eternity. However, the parallels began again, for I too was trapped in my own eternal state, forever wandering through a permanent nothingness. I was maybe a supernova, bright and destructive, only to someday decay into a black hole and absorb the vast nothingness of life and all of its misdeeds, filling with nothing, containing nothing, but destiny would have me voiding the fractals of everything. So is the nature of a black hole, an empty basin of unsaturated, infinite weight and rage. For some reason, I remember I felt 1,000,000,000,000 times heavier, heavy enough to sink through the still cement of this sidewalk and burrow into the earth's core. I looked up from my torn shoes. I was home. I stood outside of what was left of a ranch house, with more holes made from bullets than for windows. The front door barely held on to the framework from every slamming, screaming outburst. The path to the door, sunken and barely visible, overgrown stones lined the way up to 2 wooden steps. The steps more resembled spines with a tendency to scrape up against your ankles. The stairs were just low enough to need an extra large lurch forward to get past them. Usually I would just step over them, making getting into the house rather awkward. I remember getting cut on the nails and splintering wood as a child. The dark seeped into my mind from when I had nowhere to run and was so often caught. I stood staring at the steps like an adult, finally confronting its childhood horror, and realizing the terror was worth every second of old anxiety. I moved over the broken steps and pushed through the door, releasing the trapped fumes and toxicity of the house. There sat the hog in its chair, smoking and reading the paper with a face that forgot how to grin. a painted sneer replacing its mouth. Cigarette butts spread across the end table, still releasing smoke from the speed in which it went through them. Clothes stuck to its skin and in between the crevices of its stomach. Facing the door as I walked in, it was still oblivious to the fact I had entered. Peering over its paper, it showed no interest I had come home from school, and that it was no closer to 9 o'clock. "I told you," it said, chewing a cigarette. "Look who made their way home." If there was any standard to what could still be considered as the human species, this was certainly pushing life's limit. Lethargic, filthy, absent, poisonous, the personification of rot and grease. Human fit this animal as well as its shirt, stretched and ripped in an effort to cover its monstrous body and enough skin to call itself human. For a moment I stood in the doorway, as if I was waiting for some hospitality to "Come on in and take a seat. There's fresh coffee in the kitchen if you'd like, and the paper today if you're into reading much." But no. There came the spider, emerging from its chamber, crawling speedily across the floor.
"Skipping school?"
The spider wore this week's worth of TV dinners and never-ending fuming smog. A feeble strand stood in front of me, and a raised hand was my welcome home before the traditional greetings.
"You want to waste that money for pencils and fucking folders?"
The spider raised its hand once nevermore.
"You out your goddamn mind?"
It ached out of its tar-ridden throat. And soon began the barrage. It hit and hit and hit, and was thrown back miles into its cavern with a throaty screech. The look of pure disbelief was enough to keep me going for years. The hogfather sprang up as fast as its engorged legs would allow. "You out of your goddamn mind?" It tried its best to close the distance between us, but for a large enough animal like itself, it fought in vain. "You get your fucking ass over here!" it yelled, shaking off its belt, releasing the horrid plummet of its gut. This was all routine, but it was the first time my opposition was backed by rage. True, unfrozen, enduring rage. My eyes were seats in a theater, the audience of my acting, where it played out like an overdrawn and vaguely concluded tragedy of denial and regret. The hog stood close enough to choke, belt overhead, with the painted face of icy landscapes, ripping out what's locked deep, deep inside. And so I fell. I fell deep into remembering every swollen bee sting and low-hanging branch, every circular scar of rolled depression and anxiety inhaled through my skin and breathed out through my veins. Every drunken dance of bruises and red tears, every leather snake bite and every day of sandbag tryouts. Every poem of black ventriloquism recited perfectly to administrations of all-knowing and blind paid professionals posing as your friend who lived just 3 blocks down that could rip the prided dress of mental molestation from the mannequin of your mind. And so I fell. There I laid on the hard cracked flooring with a new lashing crawling over my arm. I didn't wince or cry or even flinch. I stood up and grabbed the hog's throat. Holding it at arm's reach, I wanted to dig my nails into its esophagus. The animals, now beyond words at my display, were stunned by my retaliation.
"What are you doing?"
cried the spider. I held the hog's neck as a farmer would carry a runt to the hatchet. He was the 11th pig of an already swarmed mother.
There was no room for him.
Its face turned red to blue to yellow, green, and purple. The spider scratched and clawed and shook me, but I was not letting go. The hog drooled over my hand, gasping, pleading, "Let me go! Let me go so I can finally kill you!" I could have squeezed through its neck and caught in my hands the last breath escaping its lungs. But I stopped just shy of twisting off its excuse for a head. I don't know why I let go. I got tired and too disgusted of touching this filthy animal, and the spider's bite was leaving marks. I dropped the hog to the floor with a hard thud, the sound of bags of garbage being thrown into a dumpster from the roof of a building. Looking down at it, clutching its throat and gasping, filled me with righteousness. I could have killed it if I wanted, and I wanted to. I wanted to pull its stomach out with its tongue. I wanted to wrap my fingers around its spine through its chest. I wanted it to experience more than what my entire life was subject to. And in the end, the hog did. They both did.
By my hands do rend for the sake of godly deeds and blessings.
I left the house. The twisted spine stairs gnawed at my ankles as I left, forgetting them in my fury. I started again, speedily trudging down the sidewalk, feeling no better than I had before. Did I come home only to abruptly leave, with the reassurance that I do indeed share the most despicable human DNA in this species? If I had no plan, what was this power good for other than to fuel my tantrums? I peered down at my leg as blood poured out like a broken faucet. I could not fathom that I, after all I had been told, would still bleed. The mortality of my life was capitalized with the thorny prick of death, my head filled with every grueling thought as I began bursting at the seams. As I stared beyond the crumbling driveway, the road ahead of me looked bare, split into two paths. Without any thought, I chose one way and started once again. The trudging. Further, I pushed myself for no discernible reason, just away from it all. The alley, the hospital, the animals. It was starting to hurt deeper than just hysterical love ripped away without mercy. It started hurting like being in a whirlpool. Everyone on Earth came to watch and criticize how foolish I was to have not gotten myself out and finally being sucked underneath and to the other side where I died alone. I can't keep walking because eventually I'll have turned back to somewhere I know I've already been. Pick a direction.
Run for your life.